I said, Chess, you'll catch cold. She said, they never are, Chess. Chess with no clothes on. Chess in the birthday suits, that kind of chess. Chess men. I said, go to bed and turn your blanket off. Next day, she's right as rain. Never mentions it anyway. Except just as we're coming out of the house. She says, I do love you, Graham. I said, well, I love you. She said, anyway, he had a hearing aid. What's on the agenda for today, then? I said, I thought we might have a little drive to Ripon. She said, oh, that's nice. We can go in the cathedral. We like old buildings, don't we? You and me. And she put her arm through mine.
More Talking Heads here on BBC4 Next this evening with Dame Maggie Smith as Susan, a bored and lonely vicar's wife in A Bed Among the Lentils. Our tribute to Alan Bennett continues in just a moment. Stay with us.
I'll never turn, I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
The Scandinavian thriller that started it all is coming to an end. Brand new Wallander, next Saturday at 9 on BBC4 and BBC4 HD.
When the first travellers crossed America, they were faced with this: an immense landscape of extremes, from snow-capped mountains to arid plains and thick forests.
The landscape shaped the nation. The adversity, tenacity, the very nature of the American personality was defined.
Ray Mears explores the land behind the Hollywood legend and discovers the wild that made the West. How the Wild West was won with Ray Mears starts Thursday, 22nd of May on BBC4.
Now on BBC4, Dame Maggie Smith makes a bed among the lentils as our birthday tribute to the great Alan Bennett continues.
Jeffrey's bad enough, but I'm glad I wasn't married to Jesus. The lesson this morning was the business in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus prays, the disciples keep falling asleep. He wakes them up and says, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" It's my mother. I overslept this morning, flung on a cardigan. Got there just as everybody was standing up. It was Holy Communion, so the militants were out in force. The sub-zero temperatures in the side chapel doubtless adding to the attraction. Geoffrey kicks off by apologising for not defrosting the church. Subdued merriment. Mr. Medlicott has shingles, Geoffrey explains, and as is well known, has consistently refused to initiate us lesser mortals into the mysteries of the boiler. Helpless laughter. Mrs. Belcher read the lesson. Mr. Belcher took the plate round. Big day for you, I said to them afterwards. The sermon was about sex. I didn't actually nod off, though I'd heard it before. Marriage gives the okay to sex, is the gist of it. But while it is far from being the be-all and end-all, you can say that again, it is nevertheless the supreme joy of the married state, a symbol of the relationship between us and God. So, Geoffrey concludes, when we put our money in the plate, it is a symbol of everything in our lives we are offering to God, and that includes our sex. I could only find 10p. Thinking about the sermon, during the hymn, I felt a pang of sympathy for the deity, being gifted with all that sex. No fun being made a present of the rare and desiccated conjunctions that take place between Geoffrey and me, or the frightful collisions which presumably still occur between the Belchers, not to mention whatever shame-faced fumblings go on between Miss Budd and Miss Bantock. It's all right if we offer it to God, Alice. Oh, well, if you say so, Pauline. Amazing scenes at the church door. Geoffrey had announced that after Easter the bishop would be paying us a visit, so the fan club were running round in circles. Miss Frobisher even going so far as to squeeze my elbow. Meanwhile, Geoffrey stands there, the wind billowing out his surplice, ruffling his hair. What who's who in the Diocese of Ripon calls his schoolboy good looks. I helped put away the books while he did his underneath this cassock, I am but an ordinary man like anybody else act. Such a live wire, says Mrs. Belcher, really putting this parish on the map. That's right, burbles Mrs. Shrubsole, and looking at me. We must cherish him. We came back and I cherished him with chicken wings in a tuna fish sauce. He said, that went down well. I said, the chicken wings? My sermon, he said, I felt it hit the nail on the head. Then he put his hand over mine, hoping, I suppose, having hit one nail, he might hit another, but I said I had to go round with the parish magazine. Good girl, he said. I can attack my paperwork instead. Road's busy. Sunday afternoon. Families taking a run out. Wheeling the pram. Walking the dog. Living. Almighty God, unto whom all hearts be open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy glorious name, and not spend our Sunday afternoons parked in a lay-by on the ring road, wondering what happened to our life. When I got back, Geoffrey was just off to Evensong. Was I going to come? No, I said. Really? He said. Then I'd better pretend you have a headache. Why? One of the unsolved mysteries of life, or one of the unsolved mysteries of my life, is why the vicar's wife has to go to church at all. A barrister's wife doesn't have to go to court. An actor's wife doesn't go to every performance, so why do I always have to be on parade? Not to mention the larger question of whether one actually believes in God in the first place. It's assumed, being the vicar's wife, one does, but the questions never actually come up. Well, not with Geoffrey, anyway. Of course, I can see why. You've only to look at me, the hair and the one smile. You'd think I was just cut out for God, and maybe I am. I'd just like to have been asked, that's all. Well, not that it matters, of course. As long as you can run a tight jumble sale, you can believe in what you like. Could be Geoffrey doesn't believe in God either. I've always longed to ask him, only God never seems to crop up. Geoffrey, I'd say, yes. Yes, Susan? Do you really believe in God? I mean, cards on the table. You don't, honestly, do you? God's just a job like any other. You've got to bring home the bacon somehow. But no. Not a word. The subject's never discussed. After he'd gone, I discovered we were out of sherry, so I've just been round to the off-licence. The woman served me. Didn't smile. Can't think why. I spend enough. We were discussing the ordination of women. The bishop asked me what I thought. Should women take the services? So long as it doesn't have to be me, I wanted to say I'm quite happy if they're taken by a trained gorilla. Oh, yes, said Geoffrey. Susan's all in favour. She's keener than I am, aren't you, darling? I said, more sprouts, anybody? He's on the young side for a bishop. But he was a prominent sportsman at university, so that would explain it. Boxing or rugby. Broken nose at some stage, anyway. One of the Christianity's Common Sense Brigade. Hobby's bricklaying, apparently. Refers to me throughout as Mrs. Vicar. Says he'll have beer with his lunch. Geoffrey says he'll join him, so this leaves me with the wine. Geoffrey's all over him because rumour is he's shopping round for a new archdeacon. Asks Jeff how outgoing I am. Actually says that. How outgoing is Mrs. Vicar? Mr. Vicar jumps in with a quick rundown of my accomplishments and an outline of my punishing schedule. It appears that on a typical day, I kick off by changing the wheel on the Fiesta, then hasten to the bedside of a dying pensioner. After which, having done the altar flowers and dispensed warmth and appreciation to sundry parishioners en route, I top off a thrill-packed morning by taking round meals on wheels. Somehow, and this to me is the miracle, says Geoffrey, somehow managing to rustle up a delicious lunch in the interim. The miracle somewhat belied by the flabby lasagna we're currently embarked on. The ladies, says the bishop, where would we be without them? Disaster strikes as I'm doling out the tin peaches. The jug into which I've decanted the carnation milk gets knocked over, possibly by me. Geoffrey, for whom turning the other cheek is part of the job, claims it caught his elbow. His lordship takes the same line, insisting he gets doused in carnation milk practically every day of the week. Still, when I get a dishcloth and sponges gaiters, I catch him giving me a funny look. It's Mary Magdalene and the Nivea cream all over again. After lunch, Geoffrey's supposed to be taking him on a tour of the parish. But while we're having our cup of instant, he claps his hand to his temple because he suddenly remembers he's got to be in Keighley blessing a steam engine. When he departed, we were stacking the dishwasher. I asked Geoffrey how he thought it had gone. Doesn't know. Fingers crossed, I said. I think there are more constructive things we could do than that, he said crisply, and goes off to mend his inner tube. I sit by the Arga for a bit, and as I doze off it comes to me. By constructive things, he perhaps means prayer. When I wake up, there's a note from Geoffrey saying, "Gone to talk to the ladies' bright hour. Go to bed." I wasn't sleepy. And anyway, we were running low on sherry, so I went into Leeds. I've stopped going round the corner because, well, I owe them a bit on the side, and anyway, she's so surly. I've discovered this little Indian shop behind the infirmary. It's newsagents, basically, but it sells drink and anything, really, the way they do. Open last thing at night, Sundays included. My ideal. Ramesh, he's called. Mr. Ramesh, I call him. Though Ramesh is probably his Christian name. Though not Christian, of course. I've been there once or twice now, only this time he takes me into the back place and sits me down on a sack of something and chats. Little statuette of a god on the wall. A god, not the definite article. One of several thousand gods, apparently. Safety in numbers, I say. Only he doesn't understand. Looks more fun than Jesus, anyway. Shows me pictures of other gods getting up to all sorts. Well, I said, she looks a very busy lady. Is that yoga? Well, it helps, he said. He's quite athletic too, apparently. Married. But his wife's only about 14, so they won't let her in. He calls me Mrs. Vicar too. Only it's different. He has lovely teeth. Once upon a time, I had my life all planned out. Or part of it, at any rate. I wasn't clear about the first half, but at the stroke of 50, I was all set to turn into a wonderful woman. The wife to a doctor or local architect, chairman of the parish council, pillar of the WI, a wise, witty and ultimately white-haired old lady who always stood on her own feet until one day, at the age of 80, coming out of the county library, she falls under the weight of her improving book, breaks her hip, and dies peacefully, continently and without fuss, under a snowy coverlet in the cottage hospital. And coming away from her funeral, in a country churchyard on a bright winter's afternoon, people would say, well, she was a wonderful woman. Had this been a serious ambition, I should have seen to it I was equipped with the skills necessary to its achievement. How to produce jam, which, having reached a good rolling boil, successfully coats the spoon. How to whip up a Victoria sponge that just gives to the fingertips. How to plan, execute and carry out a successful garden fete. All weapons in the armory of every upstanding Anglican lady. But no. I can do none of these things. I'm even a fool at the flower arrangement. I ought to have a PhD in the subject, the number of classes I've been to, but my effort shows much evidence of art as walking sticks in an umbrella stand. Actually, it's temperament. I don't have it. If you think squash is a competitive activity, try flower arrangement. Yesterday morning, the rota had Miss Frobisher and Mrs. Belcher down to do the side aisles, while I'm paired with Mrs. Shrubsole to do the altar and the lectern. So, round mid-morning, I wander over to the church with a few dog-eared chrysanthemums. They look as if they could do with an immediate drink, so I call in at the vestry and root out a vase or two from the cupboard where Geoffrey keeps the communion wine. When I emerge, Mrs. Shrubsole is at the altar, well embarked on her arrangement. I said, I thought I was doing the altar. She said, no. I think Mrs. Belcher will bear me out. I'm down to do the altar. You're doing the lectern. Why? Do you have a preference? The only preference I have is to shove my chrysanthemums up her nose, but I practice a bit of Christian forbearance and go stick them in a vase on the lectern. In the best tradition of my floral arrangements, they look like the poles of a wigwam, so I go and see if I can cadge a bit of backing off Mrs. Belcher. I said, are you using this? You're picking up a piece of mouldy old fern. Well, yeah, I certainly am. She said, I need every bit of my spirea. It gives it body. So I wander over and see if Miss Frobisher's got any greenery going begging, only she's doing some Japanese number. Vase like a test tube, half filled with gravel in which she's throttling a lone carnation. So I retire to the vestry to calm my shattered nerves. When I come out, ready to tackle my chrysanthemums again, Mrs. Shrubsole has apparently finished and has fetched the other two up to the altar to admire her handiwork. So I wander up to have a look. Well, it's a brown job. Beech leaves, teasels, grass, that school of thought. Mrs. Shrubsole is saying, it's called Forest Murmurs. It's what I did for my highly commended at Harrogate last year. What do you think? Gert and Daisy are, of course, speechless with admiration, but when I tentatively suggested it might look a bit better if she cleared up the bits and pieces lying around, she said, what bits and pieces? I said, these acorns and fir cones. What's that conker in aid of? She said, leave that. The whole arrangement pivots on that. I said, what do you mean, pivots? She said, when the adjudicator was commenting on my arrangement, he particularly singled out the hint I gave of the forest floor. I said, Mrs. Shrubsole, this is the altar of St. Michael and all angels. It is not the wind in the willows. Mrs. Belcher said, I think we ought to sit down. I said, we do not want to sit down. I said, it's all very well, transforming the altar into something out of Bambi, but do not forget, for the vicar, the altar is his working surface. Furthermore, I said, should the vicar sink to his knees in prayer, which since this is the altar he is wont to do, he's quite likely to get one of these teasel things in the eye. I said, this is not a flower arrangement. This is a booby trap, a health hazard. In fact, I say, in a moment of supreme inspiration, it should be labelled has flaw. Permit me to demonstrate. And I began to get down on my knees, just to prove to her how lethal her bloody Forest Murmurs is. Only I must have slipped, because next thing I know, I'm rolling down the altar steps and end up banging my head on the communion rail. Mrs. Shrubsole, who along with every other organisation known to man has been in St. John's Ambulance Brigade, wants me left lying down, whereas Mrs. Belcher is all for getting me onto a chair. Leave them lying down, says Mrs. Belcher, and they inhale their own vomit. It happens all the time. Only, says Mrs. Shrubsole, when they have vomited. She hasn't vomited. I say, no, but I will if I have to listen to any more of this drivel and begin to get up. Oh, is that blood, Veronica? Said Mrs. Belcher, pointing to my forehead. Well, says Mrs. Shrubsole, reluctant to concede to Mrs. Belcher on any point remotely touching medicine. It might be. What we need is hot, sweet tea. Oh, I thought that theory had been discredited, said Mrs. Belcher. But discredited or not, it sends Miss Frobisher streaking off in search of a tea bag. And also, it subsequently transpires to telephone all and sundry in an effort to locate Geoffrey. He's in York at an interdenominational conference on the role of the church in some hitherto uncolonised department of life. Underfloor central heating, possibly. He tears himself away and comes haring back, thinking I'm at death's door, only finding I'm not, has nothing more constructive to add than I have a lie down. This gives the fan club the green light to invade the vicarage, making endless cups of tea, and Geoffrey his lunch, and, as he puts it, spoiling him rotten. Since this also licenses them to conduct a fact-finding survey of the housekeeping arrangements, or absence of same. Where does she keep the Duraglit, Vicar? A good time is had by all. Meanwhile, Emily Bronte's laid out on the sofa in a light doze. I come round, and Geoffrey's saying, "Mrs. Shrubsole's just going, darling." I don't get up. I never even open my eyes. I just wave and say, "Goodbye, Mrs. Shrubsole." Only, thinking about it as I drift off again, I think I may have said Mrs. Subsoil. Well, I meant the other. Shrub soil. When I woke up, it was dark. Geoffrey had gone out. Couldn't find a thing in the cupboard. So I got the car out and drove into Leeds. I sat in the shop for a bit, didn't say much. Then I felt a bit wanny. Mr. Ramish let me go into the back place to lie down. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, Mr. Ramish had come in and started taking his clothes off. I said, "What are you doing? What about the shop?" He said, "Do not worry about the shop. I have closed the shop." I said, "But it's only 9. You don't close till 11. He said, "I do tonight." I said, "Why? What's tonight?" He said, "A chance in a million. A turn-up for the books. Will you take your clothes off, please?" And I did. You never see pictures of Jesus smiling, do you? I mentioned this to Geoffrey once. "Good point, Susan," is what he said, which made me wish I'd never brought it up in the first place. Said I should think of our Lord as having an inward smile. The doctrine, according to Geoffrey, being Jesus was made man, so he laughed and smiled and did everything just like the rest of us. Do you think he ever smirked? I asked him. Whereupon Geoffrey suddenly remembered he was burying someone in 5 minutes and took himself off. If Jesus is all man, I wish they'd put a bit more of it in the illustrations. I was sitting in church yesterday, wrestling with this point of theology, waiting for the service to start, and it suddenly occurred to me something seemed to have happened to Geoffrey. The service should have kicked off ages ago, and he's still not appeared. Mr. Bland is filling in with something uplifting on the organ. Miss Frobisher, never one to let an opportunity slip, has slumped to her knees for a spot of unscheduled silent prayer. Mrs. Shrubsole, of course, is lost in contemplation of the altar, which is still adorned with forest murmurs. A trail of ivy round the cross, the final inspired touch. "Arnold," says Mrs. Belcher, There seems to be some hiatus in the proceedings. Suddenly, the fan club are on red alert. She's just levering him up when I get in first and nip through here into the vestry to investigate. His Reverence is here, white-faced, every cupboard open, practically in tears. He said, "Have you seen it?" I said, "What?" He said, "The wine, the communion wine. It's gone." I said, "Well, that's no great tragedy. I'll pop out and get some ordinary." Geoffrey said, "They're closed. And besides, what does it look like?" I said, "Well, it looks like we've run out of communion wine." He said, "We haven't run out. There was a full bottle here on Friday. Somebody has drunk it." It's on the tip of my tongue to say that if Jesus is all he's cracked up to be, why doesn't he use tap water and put it to the test? When I suddenly remember Mr. Bland keeps a bottle of cough mixture in his cupboard, in case any of the choir boys get chesty. The thought of celebrating the Lord's Supper in Benelin gives Geoffrey a complete nervous breakdown, but as I point out, it's red, and it's sweet, and nobody's going to notice. And in the event, nobody does. I saw Mr. Belcher licking his lips a bit thoughtfully as he walked back from the altar, but that's all. "What was the delay?" asked Mrs. Shrubsole afterwards. "Nothing," I said. "Just a little hiccup." I was feeling quite pleased with myself, having got it right for once. Only Geoffrey never speaks all afternoon, so I bunk off evensong and go into Leeds. Mr. Ramish is evidently expecting me because there's a bed made up in the storeroom upstairs. I go up first and get in. The room smells of spices and is full of sacks of rice and whatnot. And when I'm in bed, I can put my hand out and feel the lentils running through my fingers. When he comes up, he's put on his proper clothes. Long white shirt, sash and whatnot. Loincloth underneath. All spotless, like Jesus, only not. I watch him undress and I think of them all at evensong. Geoffrey praying in that pawsy way he does, giving you time to mean each phrase. And the fan club lapping it up, thinking they love God when they just love Geoffrey. Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord, and by thy great mercy defend us from all perils and dangers of this night. Like Mr. Ramish, aged 26, with wonderful legs, who goes swimming every morning in Merrion Street baths and plays hockey for Horsforth. I ask him if they offer their sex to God. He isn't very interested in the point, but with them, as far as I can gather, sex is all part of God anyway. I can see why. It's the first time I really understand what all the fuss is about. There among the lentils, on the second Sunday after Trinity. Richard has popped into the vestry. He's put a lock on the cupboard door. I stand up and I say, "My name is Susan. I'm a vicar's wife, and I'm an alcoholic." Then I tell my story. Or some of it, anyway. "Don't pull any punches," says Clem, my counsellor. "Nobody's going to be shocked. Believe me, love, we've all been there." But I don't tell them about Mr. Ramesh, because they've not been there. Listen, people. I was so drunk, I used to go and sleep with an Asian grocer. Yes. And you'll never believe this. I loved it. Every minute of it. Dear, oh dear. This was a real drunken lady. So I draw a veil over Mr. Ramesh, who once, on the feast of St. Simon and St. Jude, choral evensong at 6, daily services at the customary hour, put makeup on his eyes and bells on his ankles, and naked except for his little belt, danced in the back room of the shop with a tambourine. "So, how did you come to AA?" they ask. "My husband," I say, "the vicar. He persuaded me." But I lie. It was not my husband. It was Mr. Ramesh, the exquisitely delicate, polite Mr. Ramesh, who one Sunday night turned his troubled face towards me with its struggling moustache and asked if he might take the bull by the horns and inquire whether intoxication was a prerequisite for sexual intercourse, or whether it was only when I was going to bed with him, the beautiful Mr. Ramesh, aged 26, with wonderful legs, whether it was only with him I had to be inebriated. "And was it," asked this slim, flawless, and troubled creature, "was it perhaps his colour? Because, if not, he would like to float the suggestion that sober might be even nicer." So the credit for the road to Damascus goes to Mr. Ramesh, whose first name turns out also to be Ramesh. Ramesh, member of the Community Council and the Leeds Federation of Trade. Only none of this I say. In fact, I never say anything. And it's only when it becomes plain to Geoffrey, and this takes all of 3 weeks, that Mrs. Vicar is finally on the wagon, who is it gets the credit? Not one of Mr. Ramesh's jolly little gods, busy doing everything under the sun to one another, much like Mr. Ramesh. Oh no. It's full marks to Geoffrey's chum, the deity, moving in his well-known and mysterious way. So now, everything has changed. For the moment, I'm a new woman, and Geoffrey a new man. And he brings it up on the slightest pretext. "My wife's an alcoholic, you know." Yes. It's a great challenge to me. and to the parish as extended family. From being a fly in the ointment, I find myself transformed into a feather in his cap. Included it in his sermon on prayers answered, when he revealed that he and the fan club had been having these jolly get-togethers in which they'd prayed over what he called my problem. Practically sent me racing back to the Tio Pepe even to think of it. The fan club, of course, never dreaming that their prayers would be answered, are furious. They think it's brought us closer together. Geoffrey thinks that too. We were at some doleful diocesan jamboree last week. I'm stuck there with my grapefruit juice while he's telling the tale to some bearded cleric. Suddenly, he seizes my hand. "We met it with love," he cries. As though love were some all-purpose antibiotic. Which to Geoffrey, it probably is. And it goes on. The mileage in it endless. Like a fool, I said to Geoffrey, when I stood up at AA, I sometimes told the story of the flower arranging. Result? He starts telling it all over the diocese. First time was at a conference on the supportive parish. Gales of deep, liberated, caring laughter. He's given the act a new twist now, and tells the story as if he's talking about one of his parishioners. And at the end he says, "Friends, I want to tell you something." Deep hush. That drunken flower arranger was my wife. Silence. And the applause. Terrific. I've caught some of the other young, upwardly mobile parsons sneaking looks at me now and again. You can see them thinking, why weren't we smart enough to marry an alcoholic, or better still, a drug addict? Problem wives whom we could do a nice redemption job on, there on our own doorstep. There's no stopping Geoffrey now, with cries of tried in the fire and come through with flying colours. He grips my hand in public, nay, brandishes it. "We're a team," he cries. Looks certain to be rural dean. And that's only the beginning. As the bishop says, just the sort of man we're looking for on the bench. Someone with a seasoned compassion, someone who's looked life in the face, someone... This is the bishop talking. Someone who's been there. Mr. Ramesh sold his shop. He's gone to India to fetch his wife. She's old enough now, apparently. I went to the shop last Sunday. There was a boy there, painting under new management on the window. Spelled wrong. Something underneath in Hindi. Spelled right, probably. Said he thought Mr. Ramesh would be getting another shop only. in Preston. They do that, Asians. Build things up, get them going nicely, and then take the profits and move on. It's a good thing, really. We ought to be more like that. More enterprising. My group meets twice a week, and I go religiously. That's what it is, of course. The names are different. Frankie and Steve, Susie and Clem, but it's actually Miss Frobisher and Mrs. Shrubs all over again. That's what Geoffrey would call the wonderful mystery of God. I never liked going to one church, and I end up going to two. I call it bad taste, and I wouldn't do it to a dog. But that's the thing nobody ever says about God. He has no taste at all.
More from our tribute to Alan Bennett here on BBC4 tomorrow night. Alan Bates plays spy Guy Burgess in film drama An Englishman Abroad tomorrow at 9. And then at 10:30 we're having dinner at noon as Alan Bennett reflects on the subject of class from the Crown Hotel, Harrogate. Don't miss it.
Enjoy thy lust still!
10,000 several doors for men to take their exits.
Like diamonds, we are cut with our own dust.
This is the original revenge tragedy. Gemma Arterton leads a cast of actors here at the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse in John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. Coming soon to BBC4 and BBC4 HD.
Comic genius and a master of the deadpan one-liner now on BBC4, a man